Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Thus Ramadan, our focus is on the divine dialogue, delving into the conversational essence of the Quran al-Kareem, this treasured gift bestowed upon us during this Mubarak month of Ramadan. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah in Ihya Ulumuddin explains an inner etiquette which he refers to as takhsis when reciting and studying this words of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He explains that when we encounter verses offering instructions, prohibitions, warnings or great tidings, we should internalize them as direct addresses to ourselves from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To appreciate this, we as believers understand that the Quran is kalamullah. It is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an attribute of His divine essence. We also understand that just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is limitless, the Quran, the speech of Almighty Allah, is also limitless. And so the Quran and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Quran is not divided amongst the billions of Muslims in this world. Rather, each of us possesses an undivided share in this profound love letter from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the first aspect of the session is to understand that every single verse of the Quran is a personal and direct message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Over and above this, there are certain verses of the Quran which begin with the profound address from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is Ya ayyuhan nas, O people. This direct address enhances the sense of intimacy in our conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is just as a father would mention to his sons when imparting advices that, "Oh my sons, listen to this advice." And this would be significantly different to when he omits the statement of "Oh my sons." When he says "Oh my sons" or "Oh my daughter," that is when the child understands the importance of the message that follows that address of intimacy in that conversation between the child and his father. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator, the Lord of the worlds, is addressing us as Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, creating this sense of intimacy between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But over and above that, there are certain verses in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us as the reciter of Quran with the phrase Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is essentially saying, "O you who acknowledge me as your Lord, O you who believe in the benefits of my commandments in this world and the year after, O you who submit to my commandments and my will, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe." The verses which begin with Ya ayyuhan nas were generally revealed in Makkah Mukarramah, and so they focused on some of the foundational Islamic beliefs. On the other hand, those verses which feature the statement Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, often entail directives or warnings aiming to guide that person who has already submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we study those verses which contain the statement Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, then there are two perspectives through which we can understand that particular verse of the Quran. Number one is that it is as if Allah Ta'ala is telling us, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, if you are a true believer, then the following directives should be adhered to by yourself. So if you are a true believer, then you should adhere to the following directives. The second perspective is that if you do follow these particular directives, if you do follow these commandments, then your belief in Almighty Allah, your iman, your faith will be nurtured and will be strengthened through adhering to these commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first perspective is that if you are a true believer, then you should fulfill these commandments of Almighty Allah. And number two is that if you do fulfill these commandments of Almighty Allah, your iman, your belief in Almighty Allah will be strengthened. So during this month of Ramadan, I wish to invite you to join me on this journey as we study those verses in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses you and I directly in the Quran. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe.